Lawyers of Reddit, what are some interesting laws/loopholes? As a lawyer, I'm going to give a serious answer, which may not be super interesting to the layman, but is an example of a true loophole. In Australia, as in most developed countries, we have a set of laws designed to stop company management from improperly fleecing the creditors of limited liability companies. So, for instance, if your company is going down the tubes, and so you decide to simply transfer all of the company's assets to yourself, or if you keep running up debts you could not possibly pay, then you can be held liable. In order to be held liable for the above, the company's liquidator needs to be able to prove that the company was insolvent at the time you engaged in the improper conduct, which necessarily requires analyzing the company's financial records. If the company never kept financial records, which is itself a breach of the law, then insolvency is presumed, to avoid company directors being able to avoid liability in that way. Now for the loophole, the above presumption only applies if your company did not keep or retain financial records. However, the instant your company is in liquidation, the equivalent of bankruptcy in the USA, a company director ceases to be an agent of the company. So if they take the company's books and destroy them, then the presumption of insolvency does not apply, since it was not the company that destroyed them. You can be prosecuted for the destruction of the company's books, but it's basically a slap on the wrist fine in practice. So long as you can live with that, it means you can get away with virtually any unlawful conduct you engaged in while running the company. The above may not be something that pops up every day, and it may not make for great party conversation, but it is a rather gaping loophole that makes a huge difference to a director's responsibility in Australia. TL. Doctor, if you are a company director in Australia and you improperly looted your insolvent company, you can get away with it if you destroy the company's financial records after the company goes into bankruptcy. Posting a sign saying you aren't responsible doesn't necessarily make you not responsible. For example, say a dry cleaning shop posts, "Not responsible for lost or damaged clothing." In Michigan, if a sues B and secures a judgment for money damages, these are the rules on what B can keep: are all family pictures or arms and accoutrements required by law to be kept by any person, all wearing apparel of every person or family, and provisions and fuel for comfortable subsistence of each householder and his or her family for 6 months. B. All household goods, furniture, utensils, books, and appliances not exceeding in value $1,000. 00. C. A seat, pew, or slip occupied by the judgment debtor or the judgment debtor's family in any house or place of public worship, and all cemeteries, tombs, and rites of burial, while in use as repositories of the dead of the judgment debtor's family, or kept for burial of the judgment debtor. D. To each householder, 10 sheep, 2 cows, 5 swine, 100 hens, 5 roosters, and a sufficient quantity of hay and grain, growing or otherwise, for properly keeping the animals and poultry for 6 months. Either tools, implements, materials, stock, apparatus, team, vehicle, motor vehicle, horses, harness, or other things to enable a person to carry on the profession, trade, occupation, or business in which the person is principally engaged, not exceeding in value $1,000. 00. In Oklahoma, if you are an adopted child, you will be considered an heir of both your adoptive parents and your biological parents after their death. Double inheritance. In South Dakota, if you ride a horse to school and the temperature is below a certain point, the school is forced to house and feed it. Under the Sexual Offences Act 2003 in the UK, it's illegal to have sex with a live animal or to have sex with a dead human. An odd loophole to this wording is that there is therefore no law against having sex with a dead animal. It's also interesting to note that despite this, under the Criminal Justice and Immigration Act 2008, it is illegal to possess an image of someone having sex with an animal dead or alive. I regularly tell people there is no magic number on a DUI charge. While there is a legal DUI limit, 0.8 in the states, above which you are automatically considered impaired, so long as the reading is considered valid and admissible. Most states have laws which allow any amount of alcohol in your system to qualify for the charge if the state can show the amount, no matter how low, sufficiently impaired your ability to operate the vehicle. Here we have DUI, driving under the influence, and we driving while intoxicated as basically separate laws. The first requires a 08. The second requires a showing you were intoxicated to a point your ability was sufficiently lessened. Fun fact to throw out at the local bar: when someone starts talking about how they had 3 beers and are below the legal limit and therefore won't get a DUI as a result. I work at a petrol station in the UK. If you fill up your car and walk into the shop without a suitable means of pay, forgot your cash card doesn't work, we will give you an IOU form and you are not legally required to come back and pay the balance. We can send you a maximum of 3 letters and that's it. It would cost is more for court costs etc to get the cash off you. Sorry, I ain't pertaining to ops lawyer answers, but I thought you would find this useful. I read in a book once that there is an outdated law in Alberta that hasn't been changed. This was a few years back though, that if you are released from jail you can demand a loaded gun and a horse to ride out of town. Anybody know what happened to this one? A major problem with EULAs: if I'm installing software for a client and I click the agree on the software, what does that mean? I don't have power of attorney for any of my customers. Consider all the software that computer manufacturers and resolers and technical people install and click OK on the EULA without true legally binding representation. What, then? It's okay to dump DMSO down the drain in our lab as long as you dilute it with water, because the law says it has to be under a certain concentration to dump, but you're still dumping the same amount of DMSO. It's just not as concentrated. Exceeding the posted speed limit in Texas and a few other states is not technically a crime. It's just really good evidence that you were speeding. It falls under the umbrella of prima facie law, which means on the face of things, speeding is loosely defined as driving too fast for the given conditions. So if you are going over the posted speed limit, but driving safely according to a set of standards and conditions, you are not speeding. Good luck convincing a judge though, lol. Lawyer here. If you set off the alarm walking out of a retail store, just keep walking. The store personnel has no right to detain you unless they have an actual basis for doing so, e.g. someone saw you taking stuff off the rack and putting it into your bag. Absent such cause, touching you could be civil battery, false imprisonment, and a host of other things. Have them call the cops. Feel say the same thing. Edit. This is the general rule and may not actually be the law wherever it is that you live and or shop. If you live in an oil producing state, odds are you don't own the rights to the oil under your land. However, the person who does own the oil rights is fully entitled to come on your land, set up a drilling rig, lay pipelines, install storage tanks, build a frack water pond, and do basically anything needed to get the oil out of the ground. They don't need your permission to do this. It is not trespassing, and there is virtually nothing you can do to stop them. Oil and gas lawyer. Edit. Added qualifier. This is not true anymore, but it once upon a time a husband could not be convicted of raping his wife. Also, a spouse used to be able to sue the person his/her spouse cheated on you with. It was called alienation of affections. Downloading CP and possessing CP is illegal. Viewing it is not. Possessing drugs is illegal. Being on drugs is not. Cops are never obligated to tell you the truth. In fact, lying is a potent law enforcement tool. If your keys are readily accessible to you, you can get a DUI, even if the car is off and you are asleep. Go throw them in some bushes or stick them in the trunk. You can sign for someone else's credit card if you have permission, but use your name so it won't look like fraud. Banks can cash post-dated checks whenever they want. In Tasmania, Australia, Alaska, the age of consent for 6 times specifically, penetration to the least degree of the vagina, anus, or mouth with a penis is 17, unless you're both over 15 and the age gap is less than 5 years, or you're both over 12 and the age gap is less than 2 years. This applies to everything except anal sex, for which you must be over 17, even if you're pitching. Also there's a defense if you honestly and reasonably believe the other party to be over 17 and they're not, but not for the age gap stuff. So if you honestly and reasonably believe them to be 16 and you're 17 and a half, but they're actually just over 15, you're going to jail. Yes, I know a lot about sexual consent laws. What of it? This is not intended as legal advice, etc. I've always been a little troubled by location-based federal jurisdiction over state crimes. That is, any ordinary state-level crime e.g. DUI, assault, indecent exposure. Whatever can be prosecuted at the federal level if the crime is committed on federal property, national park, federal highway, airplane, etc. This could mean big differences in charges, misdemeanors versus felonies, and sentencing conditions including term, parole eligibility, federal versus state prison, etc. Even if you're only a few feet over the property line. If hookers are your persuasion, a neat trick to see if said hooker is a cop is to start with paid nude modeling. A hooker will always do it because it's easy money. A cop will turn you down because it wastes their time. Make sure they are clear at the beginning that you are only interested in nude modeling. Don't suggest that anything else might be of interest. Once nudes are procured, it should be safe to move on to other stuff. I'm not a lawyer, but a paralegal in various capacities. You can pretty much claim anything as a work-related injury. If you get carpal tunnel, for example, you can also say that your carpal tunnel causes you depression, anxiety, and insomnia. If they're not disputing the carpal tunnel, they probably won't dispute anything else you add on. If they want to dispute it, they will have to pay for the doctor to prove you don't have depression/anxiety/insomnia, and they would rather just give you the money as part of your settlement. Also, wills and trusts are pretty fun. You can pretty much do whatever you want. It's like creating a little fantasy world for after you die, and everyone will be obligated to honor your wishes the best they can. The consumer grade license agreements are really about protecting the company from class action lawsuits. That is, they are not designed to ever go after the consumer, but to protect from the consumer. At one point, it was almost impossible to get no fault a divorce in Canada. A divorce based on adultery is still quicker. As a result, a married couple would work together so that one of them would be caught having an affair. Well, be in this hotel room tomorrow night. Feel free to barge in. You'd even see people filing affidavits admitting that they banged their tennis pro. Any act followed by a verbal or written no homo comment is deemed to be true a priori. However, if ballsacks touched during the prior act, no homo cannot be used to invalidate said actions. A large amount of people seem unaware of the felony murder rule. In almost every state, if you are committing a felony and somebody dies as a result of your felonious actions, you can, and quite likely will, be charged with murder. Example: 3 accomplices of yours intend to rob your neighborhood drug dealer. Your role is limited to dropping them off at the guy's house and picking them up later a few streets over. Your buddies assure you that nobody will get hurt and that they aren't even carrying weapons. While in there, one of your buddies freaks out and blows the guy's head off. Guess what, pal? You are on the hook for murder. You would not believe the amount of people who have helped convict themselves of felony murder by telling the police some variation of "I didn't kill the guy, but I know who did. Yassie, my boy Charles called me up." I get the sense that nearly all these responses are by non-lawyers just regurgitating some bullshit they heard from their best friend's cousin's neighbor as posted on Facebook. While not really a loophole, checks are fun. You can do all sorts of shit with special endorsements. If wherever you write them is dumb enough to take them, I always like to write stupid shit on checks in cashing just to see if the tellers will take it off. They usually do, but every once in a while I get it sent back with a polite "oh, yeah, I can take that." A guy a while back won a case against Best Buy because they accepted a check that he had endorsed with conditions that essentially said if they mailed him any advertisements, which, of course they will, he can settle for something like $500 a pop. Lol. Held up in court too. When you pay for something with a Visa or MasterCard, if the clerk asks you for your ID, you can simply refuse, provided the back of your card is signed. no matter what the clerk, supervisor, or manager say. If they want to continue to accept Visa/MasterCard, they must abide by the merchant agreement in place. The merchant agreement specifically states that a signature is all that is required to process the payment. Unless the signature doesn't match the back of the card, they cannot force you to produce your ID, no matter what they say about it being their store policy. Also, they cannot impose a minimum amount for you to use your credit card. Merchants do this to avoid the charge they incur for processing the payment, but they are explicitly not allowed to